In 1988, Spivak wrote a famous essay called Can the Subaltern Speak? In that essay, she introduces the idea epistemic violence. Epistemic comes from an old Greek word episteme, which means knowledge. It means the way we know things, what we count as real knowledge, and who gets to decide what is true. Violence here does not mean physical harm like hitting or shooting. It means harm done through knowledge and language. Epistemic violence is the harm caused when one powerful group forces its way of knowing onto another group. At the same time, the powerful group destroys or ignores the other group's way of knowing. The weaker group loses the ability to describe their own world in their own words. Spivak was mostly interested in how this happened during colonialism. When European empires like the British ruled India, they did not just take land and resources, they also forced their own laws, their own schools, their own language, and their own ideas about what counts as real knowledge. In doing this, they actively destroyed local Indian ways of understanding the world. That destruction is called epistemic violence. To understand Spivak's work, we need to know about a group of scholars called the Subaltern Studies Group. This group started in India around 1982. The founder was a scholar named Ranajit Guha. The word subaltern comes from an Italian thinker, Antonio Gramsci. It refers to the lowest, most push aside groups in society. These are people who have no power. They cannot represent themselves within the dominant legal, political, or school systems. They include poor farmers, tribal people, low caste workers, and poor women. The Subaltern Studies Group looked at the history of India's move from colonialism to independence. They noticed that most history books focused on rich and powerful people. These books talked about British officials, Indian nationalist leaders, and wealthy businessmen. The voices of ordinary farmers, poor workers, and pushed aside people were completely missing. So the group decided to recover those lost voices. They wanted to write history from the bottom up. They wanted to show that subaltern people were not just helpless victims, they were active fighters who resisted colonial rule in their own ways. They led farmer uprisings and local rebellions. Spivak was influenced by this group. Spivak's most famous and challenging argument in her essay is the subaltern cannot speak. Now, this does not mean that subaltern people are literally unable to talk. They can speak, sing, shout, tell stories, and complain. They resist every day. But Spivak means something deeper. She means that the subaltern cannot speak within the dominant systems of knowledge and power. Let me explain with an example. Imagine a poor, illiterate tribal woman in colonial India. She has a problem. She wants to be heard by the wider world. How can she do this? She has two main options. First option, she can try to speak within the British colonial legal system. But that system uses English, not her local language. It uses British laws based on British customs, not her traditions. To be heard, she must translate her experience into the colonizer's language and categories. In that translation, something important is lost. She is no longer speaking as herself, she is speaking only as the system allows her to speak. Second option, she can try to speak within the growing Indian nationalist movement. But that movement is led by rich, educated, upper caste men. They also have their own goals. They also want to speak for her, not listen to her. In both cases, the woman's real, authentic voice is erased. She is trapped between two powerful groups. Neither group truly wants to hear her. Both groups want to use her for their own purpose. This is epistemic violence. The subaltern person is turned into the other by colonial talk. She is defined by what she lacks compared to the European person. She is seen as backward, deficient, and in need of fixing. And this false image is spread through academic books, legal codes, art, and everyday talk. To make her argument clear, Spivak looks at the British colonial ban on sati. Sati was the practice where a Hindu widow burned herself to death on her husband's funeral fire. Spivak shows how the voice of the widow was completely erased by two competing systems of power, both run by men. On the British side, the colonizers said, "We are saving brown women from brown men." They presented themselves as modern, civilized, and good. They used the widow's suffering to justify their violent takeover of India. In this story, the widow is a helpless victim. She has no mind, no will, no power of her own. On the Indian side, the local Hindu leaders said, "This woman is freely choosing a sacred death. She is a devoted wife doing her religious duty." In this story, the widow is also a symbol. She represents tradition and resistance to foreign rule. Her individual will does not matter. Where is the actual woman? What did she really want? Did she want to live? Did she want to die? Was she forced? Was she choosing freely? We have no way to know. Her voice is completely absent from the historical record. Both the colonizers and the local leaders spoke about her. No one spoke to her or listened to her. This is epistemic violence at its worst. The subaltern woman's inner world is totally erased. Spivak respected the subaltern studies group but also criticized them. Her criticism is very important for understanding epistemic violence. The subaltern studies group wanted to recover the inner world of rebellious farmers. They wanted to write history from the perspective of the oppressed. Spivak asked a hard question: is that really possible? When a rich, educated, Western trained scholar tries to recover the inner world of a poor, illiterate farmer, is that scholar not once again speaking for the subaltern? Is that scholar not once again turning the subaltern into an object of study rather than letting the subaltern speak for herself? This means even well meaning academic work can cause epistemic violence. The very act of researching, analyzing, and representing the subaltern is itself a way of controlling them. It is a colonial practice even if the researcher hates colonialism. This does not mean Spivak thinks we should do nothing. It means we must always be aware of our own position. We must admit that we cannot simply give voice to the voiceless. The subaltern's voice, if it exists, is not something we can capture and present in our academic papers. It exists outside the world of university knowledge. Spivak also criticized the subaltern studies group for focusing too much on male rebels. The group studied farmer uprisings led by men. They paid much less attention to women, especially poor and pushed aside women. Spivak insisted that gender must be central to any study of subaltern people. Women are silenced not only by colonial power but also by local male power. Spivak gives concrete examples of how the British caused epistemic violence in India. She focuses on two areas: law and education. Before British rule, India had a flexible system of settling disputes. Different communities had different customs. There were many ways to solve a conflict. A dispute might be solved through talking, through a mediator, through a religious leader, or through a local council. The British replaced this flexible system with a rigid either or system. In the British system, every act is either legal or illegal. There is no middle ground. This system was based on British laws, not Indian traditions. This change caused epistemic violence. The British did not just add a new legal system alongside the old one, they actively destroyed the old system. They declared it inferior, chaotic, and primitive. Indian ways of solving disputes were delegitimized. Indians were forced to understand justice through British categories. Before British rule, there was a traditional way of studying Sanskrit. This was a living tradition passed down through generations of scholars. It had its own methods, standards, and authorities. The British created a new subject called Sanskrit studies. This was the study of Sanskrit as an object using Western academic methods. Sanskrit texts were translated, sorted into categories, and analyzed according to European standards. The traditional way of studying Sanskrit was then pushed aside. It became an alternative or inferior way of knowing. The new academic subject was considered more authoritative, more scientific, and more modern. Again, this is epistemic violence. The British did not simply add their own knowledge system, they actively displaced and delegitimized the existing system. Spivak's concept of epistemic violence has been very influential. It has been taken up in many different fields. In post-colonial studies, it became a core concept. Spivak is considered one of the three key figures who founded this field. Her work forced scholars to think more carefully about representation, voice, and how knowledge is produced. In education studies, scholars have used the concept to critique how Western school curricula ignored non-Western knowledge systems. They ask, when we teach only European philosophy, European history, and European literature, are we causing epistemic violence against students from other traditions? Spivak warns us against thinking that colonialism is just a thing of the past. The ending of formal colonial rule did not end epistemic violence. The structures of colonial knowledge continue to shape our world today. Western universities still dominate global knowledge production. Western theories are still treated as universal truth. Non-Western knowledge systems are still pushed aside as local or alternative. When a global bank uses Western economic models to force policies on a poor country ignoring local knowledge, that is epistemic violence. When a global health organization defines mental illness using Western categories, ignoring local understandings of suffering, that is epistemic violence. When a university requires students to read only European philosophers, that is epistemic violence. Spivak warns us against trying to create one general theory of epistemic violence that applies everywhere. The Indian experience is an example, but it cannot be simply applied to other contexts. Each situation is specific. We must pay attention to particularities, not look for simple universal answers. Spivak's work challenges us to do better. It challenges us to be aware of our own positions. It challenges us to listen rather than just speak. It challenges us to question the knowledge systems we inherit, and it challenges us to keep asking in every situation, who is speaking, who is silent, and who is speaking for whom.